once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Here we go. It is showtime. It's the 5th day of March. Happy birthday, Rebecca. My daughter-in-law's birthday. You got to mark that. We were recording this at 8:30-ish in the morning, and as I always say, things may have changed by the time you hear this. And given the week we have had, and certainly at home and abroad, that is highly likely that things will have changed, and we'll get into some of those things. So let's get to the table. Here it is. It's on the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast. Former Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, is here. Keith Leslie, our political analyst and a longtime observer at Queen's Park. And happy to welcome in Jessica Smith-Cross. She is the editor-in-chief at the Trillium, and she and her team, do a lot of great work. We're going to get into some of that, the reporting they've done lately on the Skills Development Fund. They've kind of carried the ball on that for most of the last few months. Anyway, but I think what everybody's talking about certainly here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but around the table quickly, just on the state of politics in Toronto. We said things changed considerably in a week, within this past week. John Tory, Kathleen Wynne making it clear that he will not run again for mayor. Noise this morning that Michael Ford is considering a bid for the mayoralty, and we are still about 2 months out from the official date at which they can declare their candidacy. Just your general thoughts on how this is playing out.
Well, I have two thoughts. First thought is that the field has not settled. I mean, I think we will see now people kicking the tires because John Tory's decided not to run. And that's good. I mean, their names like Rod Phillips. Yes, he will. No, he won't. Who knows? There will be other people who will come in. But the second thing is, I think it's a good thing that John decided not to. I think that was the right decision. I know that he wanted to. We all want our political careers not to end in tears, but we don't get to choose always. And I think for him personally, I'm happy for him. Yeah,
I actually invited him to sit in this morning, Keith, but he was off doing other things. I was shocked he had anything else to do now that he's not going to run for mayor. But I heard him talking about this rather frankly with Deb Hutton this week. And this became less about politics and more about the personal attacks that he was not willing to undergo. Maybe he was a little naive in thinking that his the reasons for his stepping down wouldn't come up. It wouldn't, his affair wouldn't be an issue on the campaign trail. But it sounded like already in the background it was getting nasty based on what other campaigns were preparing to do.
Well, I'm glad he read the room eventually here and realized that running for re-election or running again as mayor when he's still in a relationship with the same woman that the affair caused him to resign in the first place. But it took him a little while to get to that point. But I think I'm with Premier Wynne on this one. I think it's best for John Tory overall and for his family that he didn't do this, because it was already getting personal and was only going to get more so. So it only would have further harmed his reputation, I think, and there's no guarantee he would have won either. So I think it does open up the field. I think that's good for Toronto. And it's also, what about someone that could come in and challenge the premier on this stuff? The premier who seems to be acting as mayor, and he's looking at exhibition place, he's looking at all sorts of, the Science Center is the city owns that. I mean, they should develop it. I mean, he's got lots of ideas. He's acting like the mayor already. Someone that could campaign against him as mayor and, take over the control or retake control of the city, I think would make for a very interesting race. But I agree. I think it's best that John Tory decided to sit this out.
What's interesting for me, Jessica, is the idea that, Michael Ford floating his name and considering this idea. And I was talking to guys last night at the rink about it. And I said, well, you know what? If Michael Ford wants to be the mayor, and given the machinery behind the Ford family and Ford Nation, it's just name recognition alone, plus that organization, makes him the front runner without even being a declared candidate.
Yeah, it certainly makes him a contender. The machine, I don't think alone is not enough. We saw, Mark Saunders didn't win, and he had the Ford machine behind him as well, but he didn't have the Ford name, and that certainly has a big impact in Toronto. So it would make it for a very, very interesting race. And I love municipal politics so much just because of this sort of thing. Who decides to jump in is going to be what shapes it. Is there going to be somebody who comes from the left of Chow? Is there going to be, somebody, if Michael Ford comes in, what does that mean for Brad Bradford? Like, it's all so interesting. And we have no idea how it's going to end up because we don't even know who's in the race yet. So I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting if we look at it from that perspective, though, Kathleen. The interesting dynamic, particularly in Toronto, is not so much that candidates are running against each other, and maybe in this municipal cycle of elections generally, we're probably going to see mayoral candidates, regional leaders running against the Ford government as much as they are against others on their ballot.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's why there would be a very hard press against Michael Ford if he put his hat in the ring, because I think people will see obviously a direct connection between him and the premier. And do we really want that kind of direct control? To Keith's point, where we've got a premier who's already interested in controlling the city, do we really need to have his nephew kind of completing that loop? So he'll make his decision, Michael Ford, but I think it'll be a very, very hard push, because there are lots of things that are going on at the provincial level that people in Toronto are not happy with, whether it's education. I mean, there was a huge protest on the lawn of Queen's Park about the student assistance, the OSAP cuts yesterday. And I think that kind of discontent, we're going into teacher negotiations. The teachers' federations are not happy with the cuts that the provincial government has made. So there's going to be a lot of turmoil over the coming months and couple of years. And so I think that those people who are really not happy with the Ford government will work very hard to make sure that Michael Ford does not become the mayor of Toronto.
Well, and if our friend John Wright, who was traveling this week, were with us, he'd be pointing out, though, Keith, the premier still enjoys, the party anyway, still enjoys a comfortable lead in the opinion polls right now. Certainly the premier may be taking some bruises in terms of his approval rating, but still is way above water. So there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of that opposition. But, let's take that back to our conversation last week on Niagara and the amalgamation. And when we left off, the mayor of Niagara was talking about how important it was. He made his 90-second pitch. We heard it in the show last week, and his elevator pitch for amalgamation. Premier Wynne suggesting he'd become the king of Niagara. Boy, there was a push against that. There were 8 mayors who stood up from the Niagara region and said, "To hell with this. We're not going to do it." Now, again, to the point where they can yell and scream and bang their fists on the table all they want, but if the premier goes ahead with this and decides that amalgamation is what they want, amalgamation is what they're going to get.
Well, he's made it pretty clear that is what he wants. And he's appointed Mr. Gale to do just that. Just before we move on, though, I want to say to Premier Wynne's point about Michael Ford, it's often said that Ontarians like to have a different party in power at Queen's Park than they do in Ottawa. And I think the same would hold true here if Doug Ford is going to remain in control at Queen's Park. Toronto voters are not going to want another Ford in power at the City Hall. They just aren't. It just doesn't make sense because it would be, as you say, basically a vassal state of the province at that point. On to the Niagara stuff. Clearly, a lot of these mayors want to hang on to their jobs. And they see Diodati and the province signaling that, at most we need 4 and maybe we go down to 1. So we're seeing a lot of politicians here saying, "Oh, well, we'll make the efficiencies. We'll find that. We'll address our infrastructure shortage. We'll do all these issues that we should have been dealing with all along." And they've ordered the Niagara chair, who's in favor of this, who proposed this, to stop advocating for it, not to use any resources to push this agenda any further. I think it's a nice try by the mayors. But I think, as I said, the Premier has clearly signaled he thinks there are way too many politicians in the Niagara area. And when there are more in those 12 communities than there are that represent the whole of the province at Queen's Park, it's a pretty easy argument to make, especially when they are not overly efficient. They are running deficits. They're failing to do the infrastructure they need to do. So this is some grandstanding in it. If pushback, I guess, would be the best way to put it. But I don't think they have really a leg to stand on. The province is going to go ahead with this one way or another.
Yeah, Jessica, I know the legislature's not sitting, but it occurs to me that in a scenario like this, where it is so focused locally, the province has said, we're going to let the locals make their decision. You guys will do all the consultation you want. You guys decide what you want to do. That, in fact, at Queen's Park, there must be activity or conversations going on already in terms of what this is going to look like. Do you get a sense if there's a favoring the 4 municipalities, the one municipality?
Yeah, we had some sources who were pretty sure that they were going to go ahead with the 4 mayor situation. That was right before Bob Gale came out with his letter, and then again right after. And then the Premier came out and said, it's going to be up to the mayors. And now with the mayor's pushback, does he stick with that, or does he say no? Actually, it's going to be what we thought we meant to do all along. That's why we appointed Bob Gale in the first place, and here we go. Because I think whatever he does do has to be fast. The municipal elections are coming up. We were sort of expecting this issue and any changes that have to do with the 2026 municipal elections to come up very quickly when the House returns later this month.
So you're expecting that in the fall, the municipal election will be for 4 municipalities in Niagara?
I don't think I'm that confident in that now. That was what we had been hearing, but whether that's now been derailed, I couldn't speculate.
Yeah.
Dave, I mean, the premier has said clearly that it was going to be up to the people of Niagara. So I think he's painted himself into a bit of a corner. And didn't Tim, who is, our Niagara expert on this panel, he said he wasn't sure it was going to happen, right? So I mean, I think this negotiation is probably stronger pushback than we might have expected, although people want to look after, as Keith says, they want to hold on to their jobs. So I think this is going to be a challenge for the Premier. And it could cost him some popularity if he goes ahead, and cost him some seats in that region if he goes ahead, having said that he was going to leave it up to the people of Niagara.
It's worth noting, Keith, that the 3 of the 4 MPPs in the Niagara region are NDP, and so it is to the Premier's benefit right now that they are not sitting, because that would be just fire and brimstone from the opposition in question period.
Oh, absolutely. And as Tim Hudak pointed out, no matter what happens in this, what Premier Ford does, Sam Oosterhoff will get reelected if he runs again in that riding. That's just the way it is. The other NDP seats, perhaps the Conservatives could make some gains there, but gains that would be definitely, or potential gains that would definitely be put at risk if Ford pushes through on this amalgamation without, somehow making some sort of effort to show that there was consultation, whether it's with the mayors and he's not getting his way there, then does he want all the local councils to vote on it, or does he want to have a referendum on it? I don't think so. I think to Jessica's point, he wants this in place before the fall municipal elections. And when he was asked about whether the regional chair, which is now appointed, would become an elected position in the fall, he ducked that question completely. And I think he ducked it because he doesn't want to have an election for the regional chair this fall. He doesn't want the regional chair to even be on the ballot. That would be my take on it. I could be completely wrong on this, but I think he wants that amalgamation done, and the regional chair, another one of those political positions that could be removed. Yeah,
I heard that was the last question, I think, in that scrum when he was in Niagara last week, and was the question that came up, Jessica, will there be an elected regional chair? His answer was interesting as far as I was concerned. He says, well, it's too soon to tell yet. That was more or less the essence. So it sounded to me like the work in progress was still work in progress as to where we were going to be on election day, what the ballot was going to look like. To Kathleen's point, though, Jessica, if this doesn't happen, if Tim Hudak is right and says, it might not happen, has the Premier kind of spent unnecessarily some political capital here? Because if he seems to have pushed this forward, stirred up the hornet's nest, and then it doesn't happen, I can see how this could hurt him.
My only thought on that is that this is not a new conversation for Niagara, right? This has been going on for years. The province has weighed in for years. In a sense, he hasn't really done anything that much farther than they have before. So I don't think it's going to cost him too much. And I think there will be some changes somehow to the regional levels of governance. We've heard concerns anyways from the other municipalities that have them that something is coming. So something may be coming that changes things in a more moderate way.
But I think he went farther, Jessica. I think he went farther than others have gone in terms of expressing his desire for this to happen or his sense that this should happen. And that's what I mean by, I think, today's point, I think he is spending political capital. And I have to say, I wasn't sure why. I mean, if he was going to leave it up to the people of Niagara, why make it so kind of clear that this is what he thought should happen? I think it was... I think it was a bit of a misstep because it's going to be hard for him to pull a win out of this, given the pushback.
Dave, I just want to echo a point Kathleen said last week, and that I wish, like she did, that Jim Bradley were still around here to explain to us how this should be done and whether it's a good idea or a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. We really need him.
Yes, we do.
The folks at PDAC were busy. This is their week. The big mining conference is here in Toronto this week, and it's the largest mining gathering in the world. And I've attended it a few times now. And I remember the first time I heard that, Keith, it shocked me that Bay Street was the center of the mining universe here, globally. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. So now this has become the backdrop for a number of government announcements, and we got a couple this week, and not the least of which, it seems perennially we get the Ring of Fire. But this year, it seems as though the Ring of Fire, there's some progress on that.
Absolutely, and it's been so long coming. I mean, Premier Wynne will be able to tell us how slow and how difficult it is to make real progress on this sort of stuff. We've been hearing about the Ring of Fire almost as long as we've been hearing about a high-speed rail network between Quebec City and Windsor. But there appears to be actual progress here. The government, without using its Bill 5 powers, is getting is negotiating with some First Nations and getting some agreements here, giving them some ownership stakes as this gets built out, as we're going to get the access road built into the Ring of Fire. I mean, it seems ridiculous that we're still talking about the access road and not actual development of the mining at the Ring of Fire itself. But that's where we are. And if it is actual real progress here, that's huge. It really is. It means so much to those people to get actual development going, and to all of the provincial economy, but to the local people to get a stake in this, to have development that's somewhat under their control is a huge deal. It's a difficult task for the government, and there's going to be other First Nations that aren't going to want to agree with what's going on. So there's going to be a difficult line still to walk. But I think this is so needed and so long in coming that it's huge progress to be marked with applause.
I think, Jessica, the headline that you guys had was what Bill 5? We don't need no stinking Bill 5 was basically the line. But I think the key there is the backdrop of this conversation is around First Nations equity in terms of what they're going to get back from these projects. And I think that's a whole new, it's not new in terms of conversation recently, but historically, that has been, I think, a game changer in making sure that these kinds of projects can go ahead.
It's not new for the mining companies who work in the region. This is something that they have been doing and doing on their terms for a while now. And that you could hear when they were talking at PDAC, it was like, this is something that we do and understand well. And I think the government maybe took some inspiration from that in having the First Nations lead the environmental assessments for the Ring of Fire, which seems to be what has made a big difference here in moving the thing forward.
Yeah, and I think the idea that, 6-8 months ago, Kathleen, we were thinking that Bill 5 was going to cause, fire and brimstone in terms of just burn down the relationship with the province. To their credit, the Ford government seems to have stick-handled this better than well.
Yeah, I don't think the story's done, Dave. I think that, we're talking the access road. I was talking with the 9 Matawa First Nations about the access road in 2016. We've been, and when I was Minister of Aboriginal Affairs in 2011 into 12, I was working with the First Nations. David Zimmer, then as my Minister of Indigenous Relations, was working with First Nations around this. So, it is about economic well-being. It is about equity shares, but it's also always been about the social issues that exist on the reserves in those communities, the access to services. The access road is about the Ring of Fire, and it's about getting those minerals out of the ground, but it is equally about infrastructure that's needed because of the lack of ice roads now with climate change, and the ice roads don't last long enough. So it's very important that the First Nations have control over the environmental assessments, because, the concern is deeply that there will be the same kind of water deterioration and degradation that we've seen in places like Grassy Narrows, and the First Nations are determined that that's not going to happen. And without that control by them and, the cooperation with both the federal and the provincial government, it won't go ahead. So I think it's a good sign that there seems to be collaboration. Just remember, we've been talking about the access road for some time, and I think it's great that if it goes ahead, I think the equity shares that has to happen, because the whole discussion of revenue from resources extracted from the ground, sort of resource revenue sharing, is a discussion that has not been successfully completed in this country, and certainly not in Ontario. So all of those things come to play: the environmental degradation, the revenue from these minerals, and the social issues that have to be addressed as part of the discussion. All of that comes to play, and we're not finished with this story yet.
Well, clearly, but I think the part of this as well, though, Jessica, is that it's not just about the agreement. We're going to move forward on the environmental assessment. It was the accelerated timeline too. This was going to happen faster. Now, did I mishear, or did I imagine that they also talked about building a landing strip in the region as well?
Yes, the Premier has been talking about how that's necessary. And so what I meant to say and should have added in here is, because your question was about Bill 5 and they're not using it, which is a really interesting development. I think it's quite possible that we're at a point where that using it would present a bigger risk to moving things along quickly than not using it, that it's more legal risk than it's worth. It is being challenged in court. I know I've spoken to a really prominent constitutional lawyer who made an argument that it could be ruled. It was a really complex argument, but like an unconstitutional way of going about things by taking away the power of the legislature and giving it to cabinet, in essence. So the fact that they're not using it, I wondered, have they decided that it actually could end up slowing things down because it engages more court challenges than moving ahead without it?
Yeah, a good point. Keith, the other side of these questions, what struck me is that while I'm watching this happen, over here on the other screen, we've got the Prime Minister in India talking about, well, they're going to have access to our uranium, and there's Scott Moe on his shoulder again. Scott Moe's doing real well on the international trips with the PM these days. But the international conversation around rare minerals was front and center. So now I don't know whether or not there was any urgency baked into this mining announcement at PDAC or not, but it seemed kind of coincidental to me that they both came up at the same time.
Well, it's always good to be singing from the same page in the hymn book, isn't it? I mean, and this is exactly what we're seeing our levels of government doing. It's what we want to see them going on and doing. The development, the critical minerals, Canada's really trying to stake out a claim here that we will be the world's safe supplier of most critical minerals. We have to develop it to get to that point, but we can absolutely make the case that we will be the safest place in the world in which to get your critical minerals. As we go with these developments, especially up north into the Ring of Fire, what's going to happen here as well, and we'll talk later about the new national energy policy that's coming along and that everyone's agreeing to. But right now, if we can get, as we build this access road into the Ring of Fire, if we can get those communities hooked up to the power grid, get them off diesel generators for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Any of us that have actually had to use a diesel generator to survive when we have a power outage for a couple of days, or up at the cottage, a lot of people do that. You know how annoying and noisy and just it's a terrible way to have to rely on your electricity. This is what's happening to those communities day in, day out, and has been forever. Until we can get them on the power grid, and that's going to be the biggest, I think, change, and it's going to help with all the other social problems that they have. I'm convinced of that. Once we get some electricity into them and they're not relying on diesel generation, it's going to make a big difference to all of those communities, and that's going to come with these development agreements.
Yeah, and I realize it's grand, large, generational transit infrastructure that we're talking about, Kathleen, vis-a-vis the grid, and it's a big, complicated project. But when it's spelled out that we're going to connect each of the grids across the country in however many provinces and Northwest Territories, it sounds like, and I use this phrase advisedly, but it sounds like low-hanging fruit. That this is a conversation we should have been having a long time ago.
Well, I think the conversation's been going on for a long time, though, Dave. I don't think this is the beginning of the conversation. It's certainly at the Premier's table. We had, when we were working on a sort of informal Canada energy strategy, that was one of the things that was put forward as a we'd love to do this. But if you read the fine print in the reporting, you get down to the bottom of it, and it's like, okay, everybody except Quebec. And Quebec's a pretty big expanse of land and pretty important in terms of a cross-country grid. So I think that I think it's good. Stephen Lecce looked like the cat that had caught the bird in the press conference. He looked really like he was on top of the world. But Quebec is going to have a determining sort of say in whether this happens. Having said that, I think it's a good idea. I would love to see this happen. I think it would be terrific for the country. It's kind of like the railway, it's important to have that kind of national hookup, but again, there are some hills to climb to get there.
So let me ask you then, around that table, does that give Quebec leverage at stalling it, or does it put more pressure on them to do that?
Quebec doesn't feel the pressure of the rest of the country. I mean, it's really, they will just say, this is our position. And I think what they're saying on this is that they need a guarantee that all the resources will remain provincial. And that's their position, and they're not going to budge. I never got the sense that the attitudes around the table put pressure on Quebec. It was actually the reverse.
Yeah, and
Quebec's already exporting power to Newfoundland.
To Newfoundland, exactly.
Sure.
East-West grid. New Brunswick is exporting power, is connected to export it to Nova Scotia and to PEI. So the East Coast is already looking at this, including Quebec, as part of a national grid. It's very little east-west of the other part of the grid remains. But if we actually do get an east-west grid, which is much more difficult, more expensive to build than the north-south traditions that we've had, if we actually do, hooking up those Northern Ontario communities is going to be so much easier because we're going to be coming down from much higher latitudes. It's going to be so much easier to hook them up to a grid that's coming across from the west. I know it's going to be super expensive, ridiculously expensive in today's dollars, but the difference it will make to the whole country and to those communities, it can't be understated.
Yeah, well, and I always go back to the example in Paganchicum and the Wate Power. There were 16 or 17 First Nations communities that were involved. Yeah. It was First Nations owned and managed. Jessica, they put these First Nations communities on the grid for the first time ever, and I was there and I'm thinking, holy cow, it's 2019 and they've never been able to plug anything into the wall where they got electricity from the grid like the rest of us. So we lose sight of that in a hurry because of where we live at the center of this universe. But those remote communities, to Keith's point, that's essentially what's underpinning poverty, homelessness, all kinds of mental health issues, and we take it for granted.
Well, that and water, Dave.
I mean, for sure. Yeah.
Water's the other part of this, but even that's related because of the water treatment plants and so on. So I think to Keith's point, I think this would be wonderful. It would be a very, very good thing, but it's going to come down to, if we think about Energy East, to think about that whole discussion, it was really Quebec that set the tone on that pipeline discussion, right? And it didn't happen. Yes, Ontario, there was going to be a challenge. If it looked like it was going to go ahead, we were going to have a challenge in Ontario, in the northwest part of Ontario, but it was Quebec that stood up and said, this isn't going to happen. And you know what? It hasn't happened. So I think that whatever national grid we're talking about, Quebec's going to have to be at the front of the line.
Just in terms of the comments around Minister Lecce, Jessica, he was at the front of both of those big announcements this week at PDAC. And I dare say, I know everybody's saying the Premier's ready to run again for another, majority government. But when you look at some of the polls and perhaps his numbers and the criticisms he gets from the Fraser Institute for being the biggest spending Premier in Ontario, and he's not conservative enough. I'm thinking that Mr. Lecce has increased his values in terms of the eyes of certainly the conservatives in this province.
He did have, I think it was 4 press conferences in 4 days this week. It was a lot for us to keep up with. And I think he is much happier in his current portfolio being the Minister of Energy than he was when he was in education. One is you get a lot of press, but a lot of it's not good. And the other one, you have to bribe the media to come to your press conferences and pay attention. But when you do, it's good news. At least that's how it's been recently. Yeah,
they weren't protesting on his front lawn over whatever energy policy he was announcing this week. So, he would have been front and center of the OSAP discussion.
Well, it's so much easier to make these announcements with just you or the Premier and none of those pesky people in the legislature asking you questions and holding you to account for. I mean, that's exactly what's going on here. They postponed the Christmas break goes till after St. Patrick's Day, for God's sakes, not after Family Day. And so they're out daily, the Premier and his ministers, making these announcements with basically no accountability for them at all.
Well, and the other thing, Keith, is you don't have pesky teachers and parents and, students who are losing their ability to go to post-secondary and classrooms that are too big. Like, you don't have all those issues. And I've always heard it said that, if you're conservative, you don't want to be the Minister of Education. If you're a Liberal, you're NDP, you see it as a pinnacle of your career, because what conservatives do is go in and undermine publicly funded education. Certainly that's the last 2 conservative governments in this province. So sure, he's happy. He's much happier making positive infrastructure announcements around energy than he is dealing with the cuts that he's made in education. Sorry.
You were going to say something, Jessica?
Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt that rant. It was heartfelt. I enjoyed it.
So, and the theme lately of our conversations, though, Keith, has been at an unrelated news conference. So at this PDAC news conference on the Ring of Fire, I think just as many questions got asked about the new Metro Convention Center. And I like to think I'm paying attention. I didn't know that we needed that big of a convention center. And yeah, it's a bit of a barn down there on the waterfront. And I agree with the Premier. How many levels? And, you got to, getting your steps in is nothing. I mean, it's insane the way that thing was designed. You got to go over the railroad tracks to get to the South Building and everything else. So logically, I don't disagree with it, but holy cow, he turned it into something that was a real shiny thing at that news conference.
Absolutely. Nothing to do with PDAC at all, other than he was at 27,000 member conference that was being held at the convention center,
right?
That he says is no longer usable.
He just forgot.
He just forgot where he was at the moment. I agree with him, though. I'm with you, Dave. I hate that convention center. You're up, you're down, you're sideways, you're over the thing. Oh, heck, I got to go back to the South Building, the North, whatever. But it does have one massive advantage over the exhibition place site, which is, of course, hotel space. If you're going to put a 2 million square foot convention center at Exhibition Place, you're going to have to build. I know there's going to be the new Ontario line there and the Go Stop and the TTC, but you're going to need a hell of a parking lot, a lot bigger than you're going to need across the street at the Science Center to handle that big of a convention center. And it's just not close enough to the hotels, the downtown hotels. That's where all these conventioners stay. There are 1 or 2 hotels within an actual walking distance for a convention year around Exhibition Place. I know you could bring more development, more hotels, but that's an awful lot of space. 2 million square feet. Do we really need something that big? And is there, it's not to mention, Exhibition Place is owned by the city, which has been developing some plans for on its own without any input from the province. They've been asking the province for input, and then the province just comes in and sort of Bigfoots with, well, they haven't actually made the announcement yet, but Rob Benzie pressed the Premier hard enough, I think, that we're pretty clear. He's talking about a 2 million square foot convention center at Exhibition Place. Do we really need it?
Well, Jessica, the wrinkle in all of this is, one of the most recent pieces of legislation, the fine print in there actually said that the province can pretty much do what it wants to do with the exhibition based on its development at Ontario Place. So it brings us back to where we started in municipal politics and the Premier.
Yeah, I think I owe Chris Glover, the NDP and PDP, an apology. So he brought forward this thing about how the province had, without telling anybody, expanded its like MZO powers over the entirety of Exhibition Place, which was right. And so we went to the government and said, okay, what are you doing this for? And the answer was, oh, we're not planning to take over Exhibition Place. This is all just about the coming to and from the Ontario Place development pipelines and stuff like that, infrastructure stuff, not any big plans for Exhibition Place at all, which now it looks like may have been less than the entire truth. So here we are. We don't know what they're planning exactly, but it looks big, it looks expensive, and it looks like it's on Toronto's land, but the province now controls it.
Yeah, I don't get it. So I came in from London. I went to London on Monday to a speaking thing. I came in on Tuesday evening to Union Station on the train, and of course the place was just teeming. Now getting a cab was a feat, but there were people all over the place. They were walking, they were going into the Royal York, they were going into restaurants, like there were people all over. I don't know what that looks like on the exhibition lands. I don't know. I mean, how do you build up community like that in a space like that? I don't think you do. And I think if there is that power for the government to just basically take over the exhibition land, that the city's going to have something to say about that. And that was one of the things that when we were looking at what we would do with Ontario Place, I wanted more collaboration between Exhibition Place and Ontario Place. It only makes sense that there would be coordination. I don't know if the convention center is the right answer just because of the location. But I think that the other question is, what do you do with that land? What do you do with the convention center? I haven't heard anybody talking about that. Does it just get torn down and something else gets built, or do you repurpose it? It's a big facility, and even though you never know where you are in it, I had that same problem. Am I north? Am I south? Where am I? It still is it's a big piece of property, and so there would be a big question about what would go there.
Yeah, well, it was you were walking miles though when you go in there, Keith. So
Sure.
it felt like 2 million square feet based on the
Surprised it isn't
the traffic, right? And the other thing to consider
Most
too,
of the science center, maybe. Oh, sorry.
the other thing to consider though, that south building, a lot of it, I mean, it's way underground too.
Yeah.
So to Kathleen's point, that's a big hole we're going to have to fill.
exactly.
I suppose. I mean, I think it could be, just pre-dug for a condo. Basically, that's what's going to happen. We all know it. I mean, if the convention center itself is actually not going to be a business there, it's going to be either condos or hotels. And if the whole, as you say, that south building is way underground, that would help. The developer wouldn't have to excavate quite as much, I guess. He'd have to clear out the convention center itself. But I guess what we're looking at is a convention center that's doomed, but talk about being right in the heart of the city. It's a crucial space. You would think someone could find a good use for it. And I was only half joking when I said, I know we're too far along at the Ontario Place site now for the new Ontario Science Center. But couldn't they have revamped the at least part or half of the convention center for a new science center? Would have been a good convenient place, right? Just on the transit lines.
But if I were in the Premier's chair, Keith, I'd be saying, okay, what could we do with the convention center to make it better? I mean, is there no way of using that space? I don't know. I mean, there must be. Engineers can do pretty much anything. So is there not a way of using that? And I don't know whether that's even been part of the conversation? Or did the premier just leap right to, we want a brand new shiny bauble on Exhibition Place? Because, you know, he likes that stuff. He likes new, shiny buildings, right? That's what he wants to do. And I guess I just have a question of whether you couldn't fix or repurpose the convention center on that site, because I think the location is actually great. It's right by the train station. You've got all that community around it, and as I say, that's just going to be really hard to build out in the on the Exhibition Place. Well, and I don't know, is there a business case for a huge condo? That's a huge piece of property. Is there a business case for that? I don't know.
Given the current state of condo prices and sales, I don't know who would want to be digging in on that. But to your point, the point around the Science Center, though, Jessica, the other rub in that, well, it's kind of owned by the city too, that property. So we run into these conflicts all the way along in terms of what to do with those assets. And there's still, maybe it's tilting at windmills, but there's still a big push for, let's reconsider, rebuild, renovate the Science Center where it is. There's a push to save the building because of the architectural history there. But I'd be shocked if we don't see the bulldozer sooner than later.
I gather it is still being maintained, but it is owned and controlled by the city. I guess until it isn't, right? The province can step in. I don't think it's a matter of do they want to risk doing that, spending all that political capital, but it could use any of its various powers to say, actually, no, we're going to control this site now. Well,
I have noted that for those of you worried about it, it's officially changed. Now that the Eglinton Crosstown is running, and I see it fairly regularly, it's the Don Valley stop now. It's no longer the Science Center. So that map has been changed. That everything is good on that. They have been off for weeks. If not, we can start counting in months. But again, still stuff going on away from the legislature. But things seem to have gotten a little quiet on the Skills Development Fund. Jessica, has that been your experience?
Yeah, we're in a bit of a time of waiting, I think. So we're fast and furious late summer, all fall, doing all these stories about who got money and what their connection was to who and what was happening. And then we sort of got into this phase where there's investigations and court challenges going on. So sort of to catch everybody up, there have been 2 issues land in Silver Court. This Keel Digital Solutions, this company that runs this mental health platform. These were the guys who the Labor minister went to the lobbyist wedding in Paris, and he had gone before he was Labor minister to a hockey game with one of their directors. They had this big contract. They got some Skills Development Fund money, a few million. They also got a contract with the Ministry of Colleges and Universities to provide their mental health platform to students. That ended up blowing up. The province did a forensic audit and turned that audit over to the police in the fall. And now that's being investigated by the OPP. Right around Christmas, the province also took the company to civil court, asking for all of their money back, some $25 million. And that company has countersued for $100 million against the province. So that's now slowly working its way through court. I was at court this week for a little minor skirmish. They were having an argument over whether the thing should be heard in commercial court or not. Not a big deal, but it gave us a little bit of an insight into what that court case is going to look like. What I learned was that the province sees this as basically like they've accused them of fraud. This is a simple case. They had this agreement to provide their platform, and they fudged the numbers, is the allegation. How many sessions of mental health counseling was inflated, how many licenses of the software there was inflated. And they did this to get more money. That's breaking the agreement. We're suing them for a bunch of money. The company, on the other hand, is arguing much more complex thing that the province violated auditing standards in their audit and destroyed their business. And we learned they were about to go public with this business when the province flipped this forensic audit to the OPP. So overall, it's going to be a bit of a messy fight. Politically, I think what it means is we're diving into how were the decisions made for this company to get this much money over and over again from many different parts of the company. Was it because somebody knows somebody? Was it ever a good deal for Ontarians? How did the province decide to keep giving this company money even when things started to look bad in their contract with the colleges and universities? So that's one thing. It'll be slowly going through the court system. We'll be there all the way reporting on it, but it's not quite as hot as, you know, the minister was in Paris with this lobbyist and stuff like that. There's another one. The government gave some money to a group called the Justice Fund for skills training. And then again, forensic audit, they couldn't prove how they were spending the money. They didn't show up, and they were supposed to give, you know, tours to inspectors and stuff. They have been sued by the province as well to get their money back. And the court did award a default judgment saying that the group, which is now defunct, has to give the money back. And this one raises questions about the whole thing, because the Auditor General pointed out that the civil servants who were evaluating these funding applications had specifically warned that this group wouldn't be able to fulfill their obligations, or at least there was a high risk. They didn't have a lot of experience. There was just one guy who was the sole director of the thing, and yet the province promised to give them $4 million and gave them almost all of it. It's that sort of thing that is the less sexy part of the Skills Development Fund scandal. Why were they making these decisions to give all of this money, particularly in cases when it was against the advice of the civil servants to do it in the first place? So I've been hoping to learn more about that kind of thing as these things work through the court process. But then there's also the OPP investigation into Keel going on, the RCMP investigation into the Greenbelt is still going on. And then there's the Integrity Commissioner investigation into the Skills Development Fund as well. And that we expect to take months and months. So for the new news and all of these things, it might sort of take a while, and it might drip out over the coming months and months.
But Keith, it's one of those things, as Jessica describes the court proceedings and the obvious question, and they're asking it at the Trillium, but the obvious question is, okay, if it's happening here, where else were we turning a blind eye, or where else was there no accountability, or where else was there allegations of fraud based on, you know, those who were receiving funds from the Skills Development Fund?
Well, even if it's not full-on fraud, although there's clearly some of that or alleged going on, but it's Jessica's point, who made the decisions? The minister, and the minister's office made the decisions, in many cases overruling the civil servants. This is a $2.5 billion fund going back several years. And the fund itself is a good idea, you know, helping different organizations train workers for new skills. It's a good idea, but it turned out that many of the groups that got money were low-rated applicants by the civil servants who vet these processes, but the minister's office overturned and gave the low-ranking applicants grants, and then took some of the higher-ranking applicants and gave them nothing. So there seemed to be, at the very minimum, political interference, up to the point of now we're alleging fraud in some of these cases, not by the ministry, but by the recipients of the money. But why were these decisions made? We still don't have a clear answer on that. The premier is standing by his labor minister, rejects calls for his resignation in this, even though he was at that game, that hockey game that Jessica referred to, with the lobbyists. I mean, it just seems that it still smells, and full kudos to the Trillium for the work they've been doing on this. They led the way. They're the ones that pointed out many of these things that were going on. And as Jessica said, they tied the connections. Who's getting the money? Where is it going? Why is it going there? And there was at one point, I mean, it was getting quite salacious. We had the allegations that the nightclub owner down at the exhibition grounds was using some of the Skills Development Fund to train strippers. They alleged not, but it was going, and there was Skills Development Funds being used in the same building where that nightclub was going on. So all of this, it smells. It just takes a good program. The program itself, I say, the opposition parties even seem to agree it's a good program. It's the way it's being administered and the money's being doled out that is the real problem here. And it seems to be all being done by a minister's office against the recommendations of the civil service.
Kathleen, does it surprise you that there hasn't been any noise about moving the minister get on this long break?
Well, I had expected that there was going to be a shuffle, actually. I thought there would be. So, yeah, it does surprise me a little bit. But, as long as the minister is there having to take the heat, the premier doesn't have to. And, you got to hand it to these guys. So we're talking about the court case now. We're talking about the government suing the companies who they were told by the bureaucracy should not get this money. They got the money and now they're suing the companies. Like, if you're the company, you're saying, what the hell? You had information about us. You knew who we were. You gave us money. And now you're turning and saying, because it's in your political interest, that, we shouldn't have gotten the money. When from the government side, they were told by the ministry that these companies shouldn't get money. So I think that, they are masters of distraction and deflection. The whole thing is, it's kind of rotten from the core. And yeah, to Keith's point, kudos to you, Jessica, for the work that you guys have done, because you basically laid the foundation for this story, and they're now having to answer for it. But I mean, it's going to go on for years. We still haven't heard from the Greenbelt. We don't know what's going on there. And in the meantime, these guys get away with making decisions that are not in the public interest, but are in the interest of the cronies of the government. That's how it looks to me.
Before we go, I want to get to this story that popped up this week, Jessica, on online gambling, and I think it's probably reinforcing what we already know. If you watched the Olympics at all, the extraordinary amount of online betting and gaming that was advertised, and what I find really alarming is that it's not just a singular company. For every ad, there was a different company, and there might have been 3 ads in a set there in terms of the ad block. They're talking about a 317% increase in the rate of gambling in a certain demographic, and it's a young demographic among males who are 15 to 24. Now, I'm hearing, okay, but before it was legalized, it was 0, so there was nobody doing it. So it's easy to see those numbers jump. But that's an alarming number considering everything we've gone through with the isolation of COVID, with lockdowns, this particular group, and and how vulnerable they are. When you think if it started 4 or 5 years ago, that 15-year-old was only 10 or 12. So we're talking about a really vulnerable group here that we're only kind of catching up to, but there doesn't seem to be any willingness to back off or put any significant guardrails around online betting, online gambling.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I watched the Olympics with my kids and muted the ad and tried to explain in terms little people can understand what that is, and don't do that. It's a terrible idea. Never gamble, kids, please. But beyond the personal, I don't know what as a policymaker to do. That there was gambling before it was legal. It was just illegal and on sites that are harder to control. I think that's different, though, from when it's legal and then becomes therefore more socially acceptable and bigger. And I think you're probably seeing a combination of two things. The numbers explode because more people are doing it, and more people are doing it because it's legal, but also more people are coming forward to help because there's a pathway. It's a tough situation. I am, in my personal life, very anti-gambling. I think it's a terrible idea. But what to do to ensure that if it does happen, it happens in a way where people have an off-ramp to get some counseling is maybe not a terrible idea, but what that leads to is all of these ads and a massive explosion in the amount of gambling that happens. Maybe that's just not worth it, in my view.
Well, the numbers, though we talk about, Kathleen, as far as online, and it was the iGaming Ontario did a report. You look at the numbers from April 2024 to March of 2025, and it's $82.7 billion in wagers.
Right. So I'm just looking at the stats around the onset of online gambling privatization in April 2022, and between then and August of this year, a 239% increase in that demographic, those young men. So the thing we could do is stop the ads. We should be treating gambling ads like we treat alcohol and tobacco ads. This is an addictive practice. And, the online gambling started under our government, and for all the reasons that Jessica talked about, it was happening anyway, and we needed to find a way to regulate it. But I can tell you that the sort of surge of online ads does not have to be the case. We could change that. We have that within our control as a society to change that. We've done it with alcohol, we've done it with tobacco, and it's beyond me why we're not demanding that these gambling ads be toned down and the number of them reduced or get rid of them altogether. I really think this is a very straightforward step that could be taken, and I honestly don't understand why the government hasn't gone there.
Well, when we were kids, Keith, we watched Hockey Night in Canada. There were 3 advertisers. It was Ford, there was Molson, and there was Esso. Right? and now it's not even, you'd think, okay, the beer might hang around and you still see a little bit of it, but it's all about online gambling. We have gamified addiction by doing this.
Geez. Could it be more annoying? I'm with Premier Wynne on this one. I believe to absolutely ban these ads, just like we ban the booze and tobacco ads. But I also think it would be a very popular move. I think those ads really piss off everyone who's watching television, especially sports fans. They are so annoying. They're so ubiquitous. It's just overwhelming. It's really nuts. I happened to spend part of the Olympics watching some of the Olympics with someone a little bit older than the 15 to 24. These were in their early 30s. It's the in-game betting. They're betting on who's going to score first for each team. It doesn't matter. The outcome doesn't matter. They're betting. That's a different bet completely. But if they do this, they do this. We didn't use, it used to be you bet on a game or you bet on the outcome. Now you're betting all along on all the different things that can happen within that game. And when we're looking at the 15 to 24 age group, this is a group that's basically been on their phones since they've been able to talk almost. So the gambling is just an app running in the background full time. Whenever they're looking, no matter what else they're doing, they're flipping back over to say, hey, I was with the guy. I watched him. He won within the game. He's getting a payout within the game because the other team scored. He had picked the winner of the guy who was going to score that goal within the game. So you now got more money to put right back into it. They just keep going. It's highly addictive, just as alcohol and tobacco are. And I think absolutely the ads not only need to be banned. As I say, I think the government would score points for doing it because they're driving everyone crazy. And not only that, they're clearly driving the people who are prone to addiction and gambling. Look at the percentage of them turning for help, over 300% increase. I mean, that's massive. And these are the people asking for help. The 15 to 24-year-olds that are doing this, it's because they can't afford this. Eventually, they're going to hit a wall. They don't have the money. They don't have a job to do this. It's the next age group up. Well, they've got money. Now they're spending their kids' money. They're spending their grocery money. It's a whole different thing. It's so addictive. At least ban the ads. It's one simple step. And as I said, I'm pretty sure it'll be a popular one.
And you know what, Keith, that number of people who are looking for help, that's the tip of the iceberg, right? Because there are thousands of people who don't look for help or look for it too late or whatever. So I think this is something the opposition parties at Queen's Park should just go hard on, so that either the government does something before the next election or it becomes part of the platform of the opposition parties. Because I agree with you, it is not a complicated thing to do. We've done it in other sectors. We know how to do it, and we just should get on it.
Well, it occurred to me, to Keith's point about the in-game betting, and there were ads during the World Series that really struck me because it said, if the one team goes up by 5 runs at any point in the game, and you bet on that, you win, whether they win the game or not. And we had some consecutive games where in those series, the Blue Jays were up by 5 at some point. I mean, they might not have won the game, but all of a sudden there was a real thing I could attach my betting experience to, because I'm seeing it happen. Right? Holy cow, if I'd put $100 on that, right? And there was a real incentive in you not just saying the possibilities are here, but you were seeing it play out in front of you in terms of, Keith, the way the game was being played out on the screen.
Absolutely. On Jon Stewart's Daily Show, they do a segment at least once a week called Sports Talk, where they're not allowed to agree with each other and they go at each other. But it's each punchline is brought to you by gambling, the most addictive thing on the place. It really is all about mocking gambling. And this week when I was watching it and they're doing this thing, they're mocking gambling, here, who's going to bet on this, who's going to bet on that. The ad for, is it Bento, that online gambling that uses the goose? It scrolled up on the bottom of the screen underneath this parody about gambling, online gambling being so bad. There was an online gambling ad during that bit. It's just so ubiquitous. It's driving everyone nuts. Time to get rid of it.
Well, that'll do it for us this week. Jessica, thanks for joining us. It was good to have your
Nice to see you, Jessica.
Yeah.
your reporting and your insights here. So then congratulations to you and the team at Trillium for the good work you guys do. Tim Hudak and John Wright will be back next week. But thanks to Keith Leslie and Kathleen Wynne. And just a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Otherwise, follow us on the audio platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, and they will land right in there. If you're listening on the radio, by the way, this is an edited version of the show, so you'll want to make sure you can get the full blast for your buck when you listen on demand on any one of the platforms. All right, that'll do it for us. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Enjoy your weekend.